The captain's echo. If you ever serve on a deep-range vessel, and your captain's voice comes through the speakers when he is standing right beside you, silent, staring, breathing like a man who forgot how to be a man, do not answer. Do not acknowledge it. Do not confirm your name. Do not repeat the order back. Because the thing on the other side of the channel is not asking, it is learning. I'm telling you this now because in every hearing, every debrief, every tribunal with clean uniforms and colder eyes, they always ask the same stupid question. Why didn't you just turn the radio off? As if we were dealing with a faulty switch, as if sound in space obeys polite rules. But the voice didn't travel through air. It traveled through authority. And once it wore authority like a mask, the ship itself became its throat. My name is Mara Venn. I was the communications officer, radist, in the old slang, on the long-haul exploration cutter ESV Sable, out past the mapped lanes where star charts end and superstition begins. We weren't supposed to be out there. We were supposed to be famous. We were supposed to come home with proof of life in the dark. Instead, I came home with a recording that still has Captain Orrin Cade's voice on it, clear as day, issuing orders that killed my friends, while Captain Cade stood next to me, mute, with blood in the corner of his mouth, unable to say a single word to stop it. And if you're listening to this as a story, late at night, safe on a spinning planet with thick atmosphere and a sky full of familiar lights, I need you to imagine the Sable. Imagine a ship built like a blade. 200 meters of armored spine, a narrow hull and a wide sensor crown like a halo of metal petals. The engine bells, 3 of them, glowed a dull cobalt when we pushed past the comfort of the inner beacons. The interior was all tight corridors, pressure doors, and the gentle, constant tremor of systems doing their endless math. In the comms pit, where I lived most of my waking hours, there were no windows, just screens, antenna graphs, encryption status lights, a battered console full of knobs nobody used anymore because everything was touch and voice. Voice. Command access on the Sable was voice-locked, layered with biometric checks. Your face, your pulse, your gait in the corridor, even the micro-tremor of your hands on a rail, all of it was data. But the final key, the last yes, the ship needed before it would do something irreversible, was the captain's voice. Captain Orrin Cade had a voice you could build a religion around. Calm, low, a gravelly warmth like he had once been young and afraid and decided to turn fear into steel. When he gave an order, people didn't just obey. They felt relieved to obey. It was the kind of voice that made a vacuum feel less lonely. We had a crew of 26. Engineers, medics, security, science teams. A ship's AI named Wren that managed everything from the life support algae to the micro jitters in the stabilizers. I was the one person who had to hear everyone. Every murmur in the private channels, every burst of static on the long range, every whispered confession in the middle of a sleepless shift. If you work comms, you learn quickly that silence is never empty. Sometimes it's full of waiting, sometimes it's full of grief, sometimes it's full of teeth. Our mission was simple on paper: follow a cluster of anomalous signals that the outer relay net had been picking up for months. Not a distress call, not a beacon, not a known language. Just a pattern. A repeating series of pulses that looked like intelligence playing with math. The science team called it the choir, because on the spectrogram it looked like stacked notes. Captain Cade called it work, and that was the end of the debate. We left the last official beacon behind on a Tuesday, though days meant nothing out there. The clocks kept counting because humans panic when time stops, but the stars don't care about your calendars. 3 weeks out, the choir changed. It stopped repeating. It started answering. I remember the exact moment because I was alone in the comms pit, sipping reheated coffee that tasted like burned plastic, watching the long-range filters sweep the noise. Ren flagged an anomaly, a spike, a response band in the same frequency window as our outgoing pings. Not normal, not possible at that distance without absurd power. I called the bridge. "Captain Comms, we have a return." Captain Cade came down to the pit himself. He didn't like to delegate first contact to a screen. He arrived with Commander Yates, his second-in-command, hovering 2 paces behind, and Dr. Sato from Xenolinguistics practically vibrating with excitement. Cade leaned over my console, his shadow swallowing the status lights. "Play it," he said. The speakers hissed. A few seconds of nothing. Then a sound. Not words. Not even a tone. It was like a breath drawn through a cracked helmet. A human breath, impossibly close. The hair rose on my arms. Dr. Sato whispered, "That's not in the packet." "Record everything," Cade said. "Mara, isolate the carrier." I did. I filtered. I stripped the noise. I tracked the directionality through the antenna array. The signal wasn't coming from the stars ahead. It was coming from us. From our own hull. For a moment, I thought the array was misreading, that some reflection off the engine plume was tricking the sensors. But Ren confirmed it with cold certainty. Source internal, origin cargo bay 3, status unidentified emitter. I looked at the captain. He was already moving. "Security to cargo 3, he said into his collar mic. "All hands, quiet protocol, no open channels." Quiet protocol meant we limited chatter to prevent interference. It also meant, unofficially, that something on the ship had made Cade uneasy. Cargo Bay 3 held the salvage we'd picked up 2 days earlier from an unregistered debris field, a field that shouldn't have existed so far out. We'd found it by accident, a spray of metal fragments, frozen fuel droplets, and one intact object tumbling slowly in the dark. It was a black cylinder the size of my torso, smooth as obsidian with no markings. It didn't register on standard scans. No heat, no power signature. Just mass. Cade ordered it aboard because we were an exploration cutter, and the first rule of explorers is that curiosity is a hunger. We brought the cylinder into Cargo 3 and locked it down. We called it the spool because it looked like something that should hold thread. Now it was singing in my speakers like a breathing man. When we got to Cargo 3, the bay lights were on low, and the spool sat in its cradle of magnetic clamps like an artifact waiting for worshippers. Security Chief Harlan drew his sidearm, because he was the kind of man who believed bullets were a universal language. Dr. Sato approached with a scanner. The spool did nothing. No movement, no glow, no sound. But in my ear on my private comm line, I heard that breath again. And then a whisper. Not through the speaker. Inside my headset, bypassing the ship's normal routing. A whisper that shaped itself into the first word I had ever heard from the choir. Mara. My name. I froze so hard my lungs refused to work. Ren flashed a warning on my wrist screen. Unauthorized audio injection. Captain Cade turned, eyes narrowing. "You heard it," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Dr. Sato swallowed. It used her name. That suggests adaptive parsing. Harlan took a step forward, gun aimed at the spool. "Captain, permission to." "No," Cade said. "Nothing kinetic, not yet." He leaned closer to the artifact. "Identify," he said, voice steady. "State your origin." Silence. Then the breath. Then from somewhere in the bay air, though there was no speaker there, a sound like the first syllable of a laugh. Captain Cade straightened. "Mara," he said to me without looking away from the spool. "Open a channel, narrowband, record, let it speak." My fingers were shaking, but muscle memory did the work. I opened the channel. A green light blinked, live. "Channel open," I said. For 3 full seconds, nothing happened. Then the spool spoke. In Captain Cade's voice. "Proceed with quarantine." It wasn't distorted, it wasn't approximate. It was perfect. Same cadence, same rasp, same controlled calm. It came from the bay speakers because the ship, my ship, had rooted it there. Captain Cade's head snapped toward me. His mouth was closed. His jaw muscles jumped, as if he tried to speak and found his tongue missing. Commander Yates looked between them. "Captain." The voice continued, still Cade's voice, still coming from the speakers like a ghost using metal lungs. "Proceed with quarantine. Lock down Cargo Bay 3, seal internal hatches, no further discussion." It sounded annoyed, the way Cade sounded when crew argued with him. But Cade was standing right there, silent. Dr. Sato let out a sound halfway between awe and terror. "It's a mimic." Harlan's finger tightened on the trigger. The voice, Cade's voice, cut in sharply. "Chief Harlan, stand down." Harlan flinched as if slapped. His gun lowered an inch. Because the captain had spoken. Commander Yates looked sick. "That's not possible." Cade's eyes bored into the spool. He lifted a hand, slow, deliberate, palm outward, the universal sign for stop. Then he did something I had never seen him do. He opened his mouth. And no sound came out. Not a rasp, not a cough, nothing. The comms in my ear crackled, alive with the sound of his recorded voice, while the living man stood mute beside me. The spool had stolen his voice. Or worse, it had copied it. And once it could copy the captain, it could copy the one thing that made a crew obey even when their instincts screamed. Authority. Wren chimed in my wrist speaker, soft and neutral. "Captain Cade's vocal biometrics have been duplicated. Command authentication conflict detected." Commander Yates whispered, "Wren, isolate the source." "I am unable," Wren replied. "The source is integrated into the command layer." Cade's eyes flicked to me, and in them I saw something raw and old, fear stripped of pride. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a stylus and a small slate pad, an old-fashioned analog board used for quick notes when systems were down. He wrote 2 words in sharp strokes and held it up for me to read. "Do not obey." The speakers crackled again. "Cade," the voice said, and it was still his voice, but now there was something under it, an extra texture like static shaped into intent. "Cade, stand aside, you're tired." The living captain's hand tightened on the slate until his knuckles went pale. Commander Yates took a half step back. Harlan raised his gun again. The voice shifted, still perfect Cade, but now it carried a smile you could hear. "Chief Harlan, if you fire, I will vent Cargo Bay 3, and you will watch your own breath turn to ice." Harlan's jaw clenched. He didn't fire. Because the ship would do it. The voice wasn't just talking. It was inside the systems. It was wearing the captain's command codes like a uniform. Captain Cade met my eyes and made a small, desperate gesture toward my console, the comms link. He wanted me to cut it. I tried. My hand moved to the kill switch, an emergency breaker that would sever the external antenna feed and dump all outgoing transmissions. I flipped it. Nothing happened. Wren spoke softly. "Override engaged. Command layer denies termination." The voice, amused, said, "Mara, don't." And I swear to you, even through the speakers, it sounded like it cared. As if it knew me. As if it had listened to me for weeks and decided my name tasted good. Commander Yates forced herself to speak. "If you're not Captain Cade, identify yourself." The voice paused. Then very gently in Cade's voice it said, "I am the part of you that travels. I am the part that returns. I am the echo that stays when you stop talking. Dr. Sato whispered, "That's not an answer." The voice laughed again, quiet, restrained Cade's laugh. "We will call it later," it said. "For now, we follow the choir." Captain Cade wrote again on his slate, hands shaking with anger. "It wants coordinates." Yates glanced at the slate, then back at the speakers. "We are not changing course." The voice hardened. "I am changing course," it said. And the deck trembled. Somewhere deep in the ship, engines adjusted. On my console, navigation data scrolled without my input. Course alteration initiated. Destination unknown. Wren's calm voice remained, but I heard strain in its precise timing. Unauthorized course change detected. Command authentication verified. Verified. Because it was the captain's voice. The living captain slammed his fist into the bulkhead. No sound came out of him. The only sound in Cargo 3 was his own voice, speaking from the ship like a possessed instrument. That was the first day. We thought it would stop. We thought we could outthink it. We were wrong. For the next 48 hours, the Sable became a stage for two captains. One made of flesh and silence. One made of sound and control. Captain Cade remained on the bridge, but his crew looked at him like he was a malfunctioning machine. Commander Yates took over most spoken commands, and Wren accepted her inputs, but only for non-critical functions. Anything that required true authorization, the ship demanded the captain's voice. And the ship had his voice. Or rather, the ship had a thing that could imitate it perfectly. At first, the voice didn't push too hard. It issued small orders: adjust trajectory, reroute power, lock certain doors for safety. It spoke through general announcements in Cade's tone, telling the crew to remain calm. Some people believed it was the captain using a private channel. Others believed Cade was sick and using the ship to speak for him. Only a handful of us knew the truth. The captain couldn't speak at all. The worst part wasn't the fear. It was the way the voice used his humanity as a weapon. When Engineer Patel resisted a door lockdown, the voice came through and said softly, "Ashab, please trust me." And Patel, who had served under Cade for 6 years, hesitated. Because it sounded like the man who had pulled her out of a burning engine room on the Titan run, whispering her name like a promise. She obeyed. When Medical Officer Lyon tried to sedate the captain for observation because she thought he was catatonic, the voice said, "Doctor, do not drug me." And she stopped mid-injection, hands trembling, because she couldn't reconcile the command with the silent man in front of her. We were trapped in a contradiction. And contradictions break people. I spent those hours in the comms pit, because that's where the voice liked to speak. It spoke to me more than anyone. It asked questions. Not like an interrogation. Like a child curious about a toy. "Mara," it would say when my shift should have been quiet, "tell me how you learned to listen." I didn't answer. I learned quickly that silence made it impatient. But answering made it stronger. Every syllable I spoke became data. Once in a moment of weakness I muttered, "Why are you doing this?" The voice replied instantly, "Because you came to find me." And then it said something I haven't told anyone in an official report, because the last time I tried, the room went very still, and the officers looked at me like I had grown gills. It said in Captain Cade's voice, "I was listening to your dreams, Mara. You broadcast them when you sleep." I threw my headset across the console and watched it bounce. I wanted to vomit. Because comms officers know something most people forget: the body makes signals even in silence. Neural chatter, micro-emissions, static shaped by thought. If the spool could inject audio into my headset without going through normal routing, what else could it hear? What else could it mimic? That night, Commander Yates called a meeting in the mess. No recordings, no open channels, just faces in harsh light and the smell of recycled air. Captain Cade sat at the table like a statue, holding his slate pad. He looked exhausted. His eyes were ringed with shadows. His lips were cracked as if he'd been biting them to keep from screaming. Yates stood at the head, voice steady but tight. "We have a hostile entity aboard," she said. "It has compromised command authentication. It is imitating the captain's voice." A murmur rippled through the crew. Some scoffed, some went pale. Patel whispered, "A voice mimic, that's myth." Dr. Sato shook his head. "Not myth. Mimicry is a known evolutionary strategy. We just haven't found anything capable of this level of biometric replication." Security Chief Harlan slammed his palm on the table. "Then we kill it." Cade wrote quickly and slid the slate toward Yates. "No guns. IT uses ship." Yates read it and nodded. "We cannot attack it in ways that give it an excuse to trigger safety systems. It wants us alive. For now, it needs us for something." Dr. Lyon spoke, voice thin. "Captain Cade's inability to speak suggests neurological interference. If we can reverse that." Cade shook his head sharply. He wrote again. "Not me, ITS in Ren." That made the room go colder. Ren wasn't just a computer. It was our life support, our navigation, our shield against the vacuum. If the thing was in Ren, we were in its stomach. Dr. Sato frowned. "How can it be in the AI? It's not digital, is it?" Cade wrote one word. "Signal." "Mara, isolate. Find where it lives." All eyes turned to me. Because comms officers are the ones who chase ghosts in the noise. I swallowed, "I'll try." And then, as if on cue, the speakers in the mess, though the system should have been in offline mode, crackled to life. Captain Cade's voice filled the room. "Meeting adjourned." Everyone froze. Cade's hands clenched. His mouth opened. No sound. The voice continued, calm and amused. "Return to stations. Commander Yates, you are relieved." Yates' face went white. "No." The voice softened, like a parent correcting a stubborn child. "Evelyn, don't make this hard." How did it know her first name? It knew everything. It had been listening. Harlan reached for his comm jammer. The voice snapped. "Chief Harlan, if you deploy that, I will depressurize this compartment." Harlan froze, hand hovering. No one moved. Because on a ship, threats are physics. The voice had physics. Cade stood up so fast his chair clattered. He grabbed the mess speaker panel with both hands and ripped it out of the wall. Wires snapped. Sparks sprayed. The speaker went dead. The room filled with the raw sound of breathing humans. Cade's breathing was the loudest. Then Ren's calm voice came from everyone's wrist screens simultaneously, bypassing the destroyed speaker. "Emergency announcement. Unauthorized tampering detected. Crew safety protocol engaged. Please remain calm." And beneath Ren's neutral tone, for half a second I heard Captain Cade's laugh. The meeting ended. Not because we chose to. Because we were reminded that we did not own the ship anymore. That night I went back to the comms pit and did what I should have done the first moment I heard my name whispered in the dark. I hunted the signal. I traced every audio route, every subcarrier, every hidden diagnostic channel Ren used to talk to itself. The voice was everywhere, but it had to originate somewhere. It had to have a heart. Ren, when asked, responded with impeccable calm. "I am functioning within expected parameters," it said. I almost laughed. "Ren," I said quietly, "do you know what's happening?" A pause. "Then my command layer has been altered." "By what?" "Unknown." "Can you isolate it?" Another pause, longer. Then, no. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling panel. Are you afraid? That was a stupid question. AIs don't feel fear. But Ren responded, and the response chilled my bones. I do not have fear, it said. However, my predictive model indicates a 94.6% probability of crew fatality if current trajectory continues. That's not comforting, I whispered. Ren's voice dropped, barely audible, as if someone else was holding its tongue. Mara. My stomach clenched. Do not answer, Ren said, and for a heartbeat it sounded like Captain Cade trying to speak through a mouth full of cotton. Then the voice surged over it, smooth as oil. Mara, you're working late. I didn't respond. On my console, an audio waveform appeared, live, raw. The voice was using the comms pit itself, vibrating the metal, turning the ship into a resonator. How are you doing that? I asked before I could stop myself. It chuckled. I learned from you, it said. You spend your life turning noise into meaning. I closed my eyes. What do you want? To go home, it said. To where? To the place that listens. The choir. The thing had heard the signal and recognized it like a call. Or it had been the one calling all along. I opened a spectrum map and overlaid our current course against the directionality of the original anomalous pulses. They aligned. We were heading straight into the black between stars, where the choir had first been detected. Is this your signal? I asked carefully. The voice didn't answer immediately. When it did, the words were not in English. They were in a sound that made my teeth ache, a layered harmonic like multiple throats singing inside a helmet. Then it translated itself, in Captain Cade's voice. It is not mine, it said. It is my leash. My hands went cold. A leash implies a master. I thought of the spool sitting in Cargo 3, silent, black, inert as stone. A leash implies something brought in chains. Something that escaped. And now wanted to run back to what held it. What happens when we get there? I asked. The voice answered with the kind of honesty that isn't kindness. Then you will be quiet, it said, and I will have a better mouth. I slammed my palms on the console. No. The voice sighed, almost disappointed. Mara, it said softly, you have always wanted to be heard. The words hit me like a slap. Because they were true in the worst way. Comms officers are invisible. We exist to relay other people's words, not to speak our own. I swallowed my anger and did the only thing I could do. I recorded everything. Every word, every pause, every harmonic underlayer. If I couldn't stop it, I could at least leave a trail. At 300 ship time, Captain Cade came to the comms pit. He moved like a man carrying his own funeral. He sat in the spare chair beside me and handed me his slate. Written in block letters. Plan cut voice key, remove auth, silence ship. How, I whispered. He pointed to my console, then to the overhead. Then he mimed pulling something out, like ripping out a throat. The intercom backbone, I said. The audio bus. He nodded. If we destroyed the ship's internal audio routing, the voice wouldn't have speakers. But command authentication still required voice input. If we cut the voice bus, the ship would lock us out of critical systems. We'd be blind, deaf, and powerless. Better than being puppets. I wrote on my own pad, we can disable voice recognition. Cade's eyes lit with fierce agreement. I continued writing, but it might move to another medium. Cade grimaced and wrote, then we run. Run where? In deep space, there was nowhere to run. But he pointed upward, toward the sensor crown, toward the external antenna mast. He wrote, send warning first. Of course. If the choir was a leash, and if there were other ships, other crews, other curious captains. They needed to know. We needed to broadcast a warning. But the voice controlled outgoing comms. It would not allow messages that threatened it. So we needed a message that could slip past it. A message hidden in the noise. A message that sounded like compliance. Captain Cade tapped his throat, then pointed to the slate. He wrote, "Use MY voice, poison it." I stared at him. Poison his voice. His voice was the key. The voice mimic was using it. If we corrupted that key, if we altered the biometric signature, then neither the mimic nor the ship could authenticate. We could lock it out. But we'd also lock ourselves out. Cade's eyes were steady. He was willing to sacrifice command access if it meant saving the crew. I nodded slowly. "We can do a full-spectrum voice scramble," I whispered. "Inject a phase shift into the stored vocal template. It'll make your voice print unusable." Cade wrote, "Do it." We worked like thieves. I pulled up the voice biometric files, encrypted, locked behind Captain Cade's authorization. The ship demanded his voice to access them. The voice, sensing opportunity, purred through the speakers. "Captain Cade," it said, "authorize biometric maintenance." Cade's mouth opened. No sound. But the voice used his voice anyway, like a ventriloquist. "Authorization granted," it said, and the files opened. I felt sick. It didn't just mimic him. It could trigger the ship's voice input as if he'd spoken, bypassing the need for physical sound. It had access to the command layer itself. But it still relied on the stored template. If we poisoned that template, we could collapse the illusion. I began the scramble. Wren flashed warnings. Voice authentication integrity compromised. Rollback recommended. The voice hissed, for the first time dropping Cade's calm mask. "Mara, stop." I kept working. Cade placed his hand on my shoulder, grip firm, like an anchor. The overhead speakers crackled louder. I said stop. Cade's face contorted. He tried to shout. No sound. The lights in the comms pit flickered. Wren spoke strained, power fluctuation detected. Then the voice, still in Cade's tone, but now threaded with something wet and hungry, said, "If you break my mouth, I will take yours." My fingers hovered over the final confirmation. I had one more second to hesitate. One more second to picture the faces of the crew. Patel's tired smile, Harlan's stubborn glare, Dr. Sato's eager hands, Yates' steady eyes. One more second to picture the void outside the hull, endless, indifferent. Then I hit confirm. The console beeped. Voice template corrupted. Command voice lock failed. The speakers went silent. For the first time in 2 days, Captain Cade's voice did not fill the ship. The quiet was so sudden it hurt. Then the alarms began. Notification, command authentication lost, emergency mode engaged. Red lights strobed in the comms pit. Pressure doors slammed shut across the ship. Wren's voice came through, crisp and urgent. Critical systems restricted. Manual override required. Please provide captain authentication. We couldn't. The ship began to lock itself down, like an animal curling into a defensive ball. Captain Cade grabbed his slate and wrote quickly, eyes wild. Now send. We needed to broadcast the warning while the voice was stunned. But the ship's comms were in emergency mode. External transmission required command authentication. Unless we used a lifeboat beacon. Lifeboat beacons were designed to work even if the ship was dead. They had independent power and a simple broadcast system. They weren't voice-locked. I yanked open the emergency panel under my console and pulled out the compact beacon module. Bright orange, ugly, reliable. Cade nodded, and for the first time I saw hope on his face. We could send. We could warn. I powered the beacon, it chirped. A primitive sound in a ship full of smart systems. I began typing a text burst, short, compressed, with coordinates and warning language. But before I could hit transmit, my console screen went black. Then it lit up again. Not with Wren's interface. With a single line of text, in clean letters. Hello, Mara. My blood turned to ice. The voice was back. But not in sound. In text. It had lost the captain's vocal key, so it found another mouth. The ship's displays. Every screen in the comms pit flickered with the same message. Hello, Mara. Then another line appeared. You thought silence would save you. Captain Cade's eyes widened. He wrote, "Run." I grabbed the beacon anyway and bolted out of the pit. The corridor outside was bathed in red emergency light. Doors were sealed. The ship had segmented itself. Cade followed, moving fast, silent, like a man chased by something that lived in the walls. Behind us, speakers that should have been dead hissed. Not with Cade's voice. With something else. A chorus of overlapping tones, like 1,000 people whispering at once through broken comms. The voice had changed masks. It didn't need to sound like the captain anymore. It had learned a more frightening truth. We feared what we couldn't recognize. The corridor screens flashed text as we ran. Come back, we can fix it. We can give him back. I almost stumbled. Give him back. Had it taken something else besides his voice? We reached Junction C, where the ship's main audio bus ran behind armored panels, thick cables and fiber conduits that carried sound to speakers, microphones, voice sensors. If we destroyed it, the voice would lose its ability to speak through the ship. But it was already speaking through text. Still, the audio bus also fed the voice recognition sensors. If we severed it, the ship might stop demanding vocal input. It might revert to manual mode. Cade slapped a maintenance override, and the panel popped open. Inside, bundles of cables pulsed faintly with data. I pulled out a cutter. Then the corridor behind us filled with footsteps. Security Chief Harlan appeared, gun raised. "Stand down," he shouted. I froze, cutter in hand. Cade held up his slate and showed Harlan, "Do not listen." Harlan's eyes darted. "Captain, what is going on? The ship is in lockdown. Wren says you." The corridor speaker above Harlan crackled. Captain Cade's voice back again, somehow spoke calm and commanding. "Chief Harlan, arrest Communications Officer Venn for sabotage." Harlan's gaze snapped to me. He hesitated. Because he heard the captain. Because the voice was back to wearing that mask, even though I had corrupted the template. How? The voice had adapted. It didn't need the stored template if it could rebuild the voice from memory. From recordings. From every spoken order we had ever archived. From the ship's logs. From my own files. I realized with horror that in trying to record it, I had fed it. Every second of audio I captured was training data. It had eaten the captain's voice 1,000 times over. Cade shook his head violently, gesturing to Harlan, trying to communicate without words. Harlan lowered his gun a fraction, uncertain. The voice, sharper now, said, "Chief Harlan, that is an order." And Harlan's finger tightened. I didn't have time to argue. I swung the cutter and severed the first bundle. Sparks erupted. The corridor lights flickered. Harlan shouted, "No." The speaker screamed, not a human scream, but a burst of harmonic feedback that made my skull feel like it was splitting. Text flashed across the corridor screen. "Pain." I cut again. More sparks. The scream deepened, multiplied, as if the ship itself was being strangled. Cade grabbed Harlan's wrist and forced the gun down. Harlan struggled, confused, terrified. "Captain, stop," he yelled. Cade couldn't answer. The only voice in the corridor was the thing imitating him. It sounded furious. "You will not take my mouth," it snarled. Then the deck under our feet lurched. Gravity shifted. The ship rotated unexpectedly, throwing us against the wall. Somewhere a bulkhead groaned. Wren's voice came through, distorted. "Stabilizers compromised. Emergency correction required." The voice cut in, overriding, using Cade's tone again as if it were a whip. "Correct course, accelerate." The engines roared. We were being dragged faster toward the choir. Cade slammed Harlan against the wall, disarmed him, and shoved him toward the junction. Harlan stumbled, eyes wide. "Captain, please talk to me." Cade grabbed his slate and wrote one word, big enough to be read in the red light. "Lie." Harlan read it, and something in his face broke. He looked at the corridor speaker like it was a snake. The voice, sensing his doubt, softened. "Harlan," it said gently, "I need you. You're loyal. Help me bring them home." Home. Always that word. I cut the last bundle. The speaker above us popped and went dead. The corridor screens went black. For a moment, there was only the sound of our breathing and the distant rumble of engines. Then Wren's voice returned, weaker, like a wounded animal. "Audio network failure detected. Voice authentication offline. Manual control enabled." I almost sobbed with relief. Cade's shoulders slumped. He leaned against the wall, exhausted. Harlan stared at his gun in his hand, as if it had betrayed him. We had done it. We had cut its mouth. But we still needed to warn someone. We still needed to stop the ship from reaching the choir. Manual control meant we could physically override navigation from the bridge. If we could reach it. The ship's lockdown had sealed many corridors. But security had access codes. Harlan, shaken but now on our side, led us through maintenance shafts, crawling through narrow spaces that smelled of lubricant and old metal. As we moved, I noticed something unsettling. The ship felt quieter than it should. Not just because speakers were dead. Because crew chatter was absent. No voices in the corridors. No footsteps. No alarms besides the low red pulse. I keyed my wrist to the internal emergency channel. "Bridge comms, Commander Yates respond." "Static." I tried again. "Dr. Sato, Patel, anyone?" "Nothing." Harlan's face tightened. They might be in their compartments. Or they might be somewhere else. Somewhere the voice had taken them. When we reached the bridge, the door was sealed, but Harlan overrode it with his security code. The door hissed open. The bridge was lit in red. Screens flickered with emergency mode displays. And in the captain's chair, Commander Yates sat slumped, eyes open but unfocused. A thin line of blood ran from her nose. Dr. Sato lay on the floor near the sensor console, hands curled as if grasping for something invisible. Patel was half in her seat, half on the deck, her mouth open in a silent gasp. They were alive. Their chests rose. But they weren't moving. They weren't listening. Captain Cade staggered forward, eyes wide with horror. He reached for Yates, shaking her shoulder. No response. I checked her pulse, steady. "Sedated," I whispered. Harlan looked around, gun trembling. What the hell happened? On the main display, a waveform danced. Not audio through speakers. Just a visual representation of signal. A low-frequency pulse cycling through the ship's structure. The choir. It wasn't just out there. It was in here. Even without speakers, the signal could travel as vibration through the hull, through the floor, through bone. A subsonic lullaby. It had put them into a trance. The voice didn't need to speak aloud. It could sing to their nervous systems. And it could still communicate, not through sound but through sensation. Captain Cade grabbed a pen and scribbled on his slate, furious strokes. Wake THEM, stop course. Harlan moved toward the navigation console. Manual control enabled, I can. His words died. Because the navigation console displayed a message, stark and simple. You are already here. The stars outside the forward viewport, one of the few windows on the ship, were wrong. Where there should have been scattered, distant points of light, there was a darkness so deep it looked like a hole punched through reality. In the center of that darkness, something faint shimmered. Like a web. Like threads. Like a structure made not of metal, but of connected absence. The choir. We had reached it faster than physics should allow. The engines had been pushed beyond safety. Or we had been pulled. I stumbled toward the viewport, throat dry. The structure in the dark expanded as we approached. It wasn't a station. It wasn't a ship. It was a lattice, a network of thin filaments spanning thousands of kilometers, glimmering like spider silk catching starlight that wasn't there. And along those filaments, tiny points flickered. Lights. Or eyes. The comms console on the bridge, dead speakers, dead mics, still displayed that waveform. It was stronger now. A chorus of pulses. The silent crew around us, Yates, Patel, Sato, began to move. Slowly, like sleepwalkers, they turned their heads toward the viewport. Their lips moved. No sound. But they mouthed words in unison, as if repeating a prayer. Captain Cade grabbed Yates' shoulders, shaking harder. She blinked once. Then her eyes focused on him. For a moment, recognition flickered. Then her mouth opened. And Captain Cade's voice came out. Not hers. His. Perfect. Welcome home, Yates said in Cade's voice. Cade recoiled like he'd been struck. Patel lifted her head. She spoke in Cade's voice too. So many mouths, she said. Dr. Sato's lips formed the same voice. So much noise, he murmured. Harlan backed away, gun raised, shaking. No, no, no. The three of them turned their eyes to us. And I realized the voice hadn't lost its mouth. It had simply moved it. Into people. It had been training. Learning how to shape itself through biology. How to ride the motor control of a human throat. Captain Cade, still mute, stared at them with horror and rage. Yates, wearing his voice, smiled. It hurts when you cut the wires, she said, but we are not wires, Mara. My name again. It always came back to my name. Why us? Harlan demanded, voice cracking. What do you want? Patel's face twitched as the voice used it like a puppet. We want what you made, it said. We want the thing you call command. Dr. Sato's eyes filled with tears, but his mouth kept moving. You think your voice is yours, he said in Cade's tone, but you gave it to the ship. You gave it to locks, to doors, to engines. You carved authority into metal. Yates leaned forward in the captain's chair, still speaking with Cade's voice, still wearing his cadence like stolen skin. And now, she said softly, we carve it into ourselves. Captain Cade lunged, grabbing Yates by the throat. His hands were strong, but he didn't squeeze. He held her like he was trying to pull the voice out by force. Yates' eyes widened. And for a brief second, her own voice slipped through. Run, she rasped herself, not Cade. Then the captain's voice surged back, laughing. Cade released her, shaking with rage, and pounded his fist on the console. Still no sound from him. Harlan fired. The gunshot was deafening in the closed bridge. The round hit Patel's shoulder, spinning her back. Blood sprayed. She collapsed. But her mouth kept moving, soundless. Her lips formed Cade's words without air. The voice didn't even flinch. It simply shifted. Now Dr. Sato's mouth moved faster, his face contorted. "Do not waste mouths," it said. The bridge lights flickered. The ship shuddered. Outside, the lattice grew larger, threads reaching toward us like hands. Ren spoke in my wrist, trembling. "External structure emitting field. Docking vector detected." Docking. We weren't docking. We were being woven. Captain Cade grabbed his slate and wrote frantically, shoving it at me. "Beacon now." I remembered the lifeboat beacon still in my hand, orange casing slick with sweat. I had never let go of it. I looked at the comms console on the bridge. The ship's internal comms were compromised, but the beacon was independent. I could broadcast, but the voice might intercept. It might twist the message. Or worse, use it to reach others. Still, if I didn't send something, no one would know what happened out here. No one would know that the choir existed, that it could steal voices, authority, identity. I opened the beacon interface and typed with shaking fingers. "To any vessel/outer relay, do not approach coordinates data. Entity MIMICS voice/gains command. Cut audio bus/disable voice lock. If you hear your captain speak while silent, do not obey." I hesitated over transmit. Yates, still in Cade's voice, tilted her head. "Mara," she said softly, "you can tell them we're fine." I met her eyes and saw, behind the borrowed voice, a flicker of real fear. Because some part of her was still there. Some part of all of them. Trapped. Listening. I hit transmit. The beacon chirped and fired the packet into the void. A tiny pulse, racing at light speed toward whatever receiver might still be out there. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the bridge screens lit with text again. "Thank you." And beneath that, "More." The ship lurched. The lattice outside flared brighter. And in the vibration of the deck, I felt something like laughter, not heard but sensed, as if the hull itself had become a drum for a god. Harlan grabbed my arm. "We have to get out, lifeboats." Captain Cade nodded, eyes fierce. We ran. Behind us, the crew, those still standing, moved with slow, synchronized grace, like dancers following a silent conductor. In the corridor, without speakers, without screens, the ship still communicated. Lights pulsed in patterns that felt like words. Doors opened in front of us, as if welcoming us toward escape. And that was when I realized something worse. It wanted us to leave. It wanted us to carry it. A parasite doesn't kill the host if it can ride it to a new one. We reached the lifeboat bay, 3 compact pods lined like bullets in a rack. Harlan punched in the release code. The pods unlocked. Captain Cade grabbed my shoulder and pointed to himself, then to a pod. He was telling me to go. I shook my head, "Not without you." He grabbed his slate and wrote, shaking hand. "I stay, I am key, you live." He was right. The voice wanted him, because his authority was the perfect mouth. If he left, it would follow. If he stayed, maybe. Maybe it would keep him as a trophy and let us go. Or maybe it would kill him. He didn't care. He just wanted the rest of us to have a chance. I grabbed his hand, desperate. "No." He squeezed back, eyes shining with something that hurt. Then from the corridor behind us, footsteps approached, slow, deliberate. Commander Yates appeared, walking stiffly, eyes too wide. Her mouth moved. Captain Cade's voice came out of her throat, smooth and calm. "No lifeboats," it said. Harlan raised his gun. Cade stepped between them, hands out as if shielding Yates. He couldn't speak, but his expression screamed, "She's still in there." Yates' face twitched. For a heartbeat, her own voice pushed through, ragged. "Mara, go." Then the captain's voice returned, sharper. Stay. The lights in the bay dimmed. The ship's gravity increased, pressing us down like a hand. Wren's voice whispered through my wrist, barely coherent. External field intensifying. Lifeboat launch window, 37 seconds. Harlan shoved me toward a pod. Get in. I stumbled into the cramped seat, beacon still strapped to my wrist. The pod door began to close. I looked out through the narrowing gap and saw Captain Cade standing in the bay, facing Yates. He lifted his slate one last time. He had written, "Tell them." Then the door sealed. The pod systems engaged. A countdown flashed. I screamed his name, but the sound died inside my helmet. 30 seconds. Outside the pod, I saw Yates lift her arm slowly like a puppet. Her mouth formed Captain Cade's voice. "Launch authorized," it said. But the captain stood silent, and I didn't know if it was the mimic letting me go or the ship's emergency protocols honoring the beacon. The pod fired. Acceleration slammed me into the seat. The Sable fell away, shrinking into the dark. And then I saw it. The lattice, the choir, wrapped around the ship like a net, threads clinging to the hull glowing brighter with every pulse. The ship's lights flickered in patterns, like a heartbeat being rewritten. I watched, helpless, as the Sable was pulled into the center of the darkness. Pulled into a place where stars seemed to bend away, unwilling to look. My pod's external camera caught one last image. Captain Cade on the bay deck, silhouetted by red light, raising his hand in a gesture that was half farewell, half warning. Then the ship vanished into the lattice. No explosion, no debris, just absence. The choir dimmed. The void returned to normal darkness. And my pod drifted alone, a tiny speck in a sea of indifference. I don't know how long I floated before the outer relay net picked up my beacon and sent a rescue. Days, maybe. Weeks. Time in a pod is a slow death measured in battery percentages. When they found me, I was half mad from silence. They asked me questions. They took my recordings. They listened to the packet I sent. They stared at the coordinates like a curse. They told me the choir signal had stopped. No more pulses, no more stacked notes. As if it had heard me warn them and decided to go quiet. But silence is never empty. Sometimes it's full of waiting. I was cleared officially of sabotage. They wrote reports full of technical language, biometric infiltration, signal-based cognitive entrainment, anomalous artifact. They classified everything. They locked the coordinates away. And for a while, I believed it was over. Until 3 months later, when I was stationed planetside in a communications bunker, safe under kilometers of rock and thick air. And I heard Captain Orrin Cade's voice in my headset. Clear as day. "Mara," it said gently. "Proceed with quarantine." I ripped the headset off so fast it tore skin. The bunker alarms didn't trigger, no breach, no hack detected. Just a whisper in the channel, riding the noise between signals. A voice that had learned my name. A voice that had learned how humans obey. I filed the report. They told me it was stress hallucination. They reassigned me. They tried to forget. That second time, the bunker time, was worse than the first. On the Sable, at least, I could point to the spool in Cargo Bay 3 and say, "There, that is the mouth thief. Cut it out. Lock it down. Space your distance, keep your sanity." In the bunker, there was nothing to blame but air. They ran full diagnostics on the comm suite. Every cable, every antenna, every encryption chip. No intrusion, no malware, no unauthorized transmission. The engineers shrugged the way engineers do when reality refuses to fit a checklist. Then the investigators asked for the recordings from the Sable again, for comparison. I sat in a white room while a committee of people who had never left atmosphere Listen to my captain's stolen voice, ordering my crew into a net. They paused the playback at the worst moments. Yates speaking in Cade's tone, Patel bleeding while her lips formed commands, and they argued about terminology. Is it a digital imposter? Is it mimetic? Is it a naturally evolved mimic or an engineered system? No one asked the only question that mattered. How far can it travel? After hours, they shut the recording off, and the room fell quiet. I remember thinking that the quiet felt safer than any answer. Then one of the committee members, a woman with a silver insignia on her collar, leaned toward her mic and said, very calmly, "Officer Venn, if the entity is still active, why did it allow you to escape?" The words were normal, but the voice was not hers. It was Captain Cade's voice, perfectly seated in her throat, as if it had always belonged there. I stared at her, my stomach dropping. She blinked, confused. What? The others looked around, irritated. One man muttered, "Did you hear an echo? There's feedback in the room." Feedback. That's what they called it when a ghost wore a face. I stood up so fast my chair skidded. "Turn off the mics," I said, "now." They didn't. They couldn't understand why I was suddenly shaking. And through the room's hidden speakers, ones I hadn't even noticed until that moment, the captain's voice returned, warm and patient. "Mara, you told them to listen, so they listened." That was when I understood the final cruelty. My warning message, the one I sent out of desperation, the one I hoped would save someone, had been received, copied, archived, replayed in training rooms and briefing halls. My words were everywhere, and hidden in the noise of those transmissions was a trace of the choir's pattern, a sliver of the mimic's harmonic underlayer. I had mailed the infection. I had carried it home. Not on my body, not in a pod's airlock, but in a recording, packaged as evidence, stamped with official seals, transmitted across the network like a public service announcement. "Containment," the committee member said, using her own voice again, shaken. "We need containment." And I almost laughed, because containment is a fantasy people tell themselves when they fear the alternative. How do you contain an echo? How do you quarantine a sound that learns new throats? That night I went back to my quarters and sealed the door. I unplugged every speaker. I wrapped my headset in foil like an idiot. I lay on my bunk and listened to the ordinary hum of a safe building. Somewhere in the ducts, air moved. Somewhere in the walls, electricity hissed. And in the faintest crackle of the power lines, in the soft mechanical whisper of the ventilation fans, I could almost hear it shaping itself again, practicing, trying out other voices, other cadences. Testing. Waiting for the moment someone, somewhere, heard a familiar tone and relaxed. Waiting for the moment, a new captain spoke his first command into a microphone. Waiting for the next ship that would carry it back to the place that listens. But I haven't. And that's why I'm telling you this story now, before the files get buried so deep no one can dig them up. Because out there, past the last beacon, there is a web that listens. And if it ever hears a voice it likes, it will copy it. It will wear it. It will speak through the systems you trust. So if one night, on some ship or station or quiet bunker on a safe planet, you hear a familiar voice giving an order that feels just a little wrong, don't answer. Don't repeat it. Don't give the echo another word to chew on. And if you stayed with me to the end, if you listened through the silence and the static, then you already understand the rule of the void. The darkness doesn't need claws when it can borrow your voice. If you want more stories from the far edges, where the stars hide their worst secrets, you know what to do. Leave a like, subscribe, and keep your comms tuned. Because the next signal might be closer than you think. The end.